long exposure photography is something I've been very interested in ever since I learned about it. I found something completely amazing, really, truly, almost surreal and magical in the way you can squeeze multiple seconds of time into a single frame. Sup people, this is Hop Hooligan's Summer Punch. Absolutely, by far, my most favorite beer of all time. Apparently we even have a soundtrack. Let me have a big gulp. Jesus. These are words I do not use lightly. This is the best beer I have ever had. Sweaty, wet, really cold, really, really bitter, and light in the most beautiful way imaginable. It's easy to drink. Really summery. Very powerful citrus flavors. By far the best beer I've ever had. Be that as it may, this is not the subject of today's video. We're here in Mihai Eminescu Park in Arad. There's a bit of a fair going on. It started a few days ago, but due to really rainy weather, there hasn't been much activity, and haven't even been here until now. But there's a fair bit of sun, quite pleasant weather, although rather wet, however very warm and inviting. So I thought I'd make a new video. Long exposure photography is something I've been very interested in ever since I learned about it. I found something completely amazing, really, truly, almost surreal and magical in the way you can squeeze multiple seconds of time into a single frame. Though everybody knows the car trails, but there's also the type of long exposure photography that's not as popular, let's say. And this is what I'm going to talk about today. Also heavily inspired by Alexei Titarenko's work. He's a Russian photographer, probably my favorite photographer. He does these very ghostly, surreal images of people in motion. Just look him up. You're bound to see really, really wonderful stuff. So, take Alexei Titarenko, take my passion and my admiration for him, take my fascination with long exposure photography, meld them together, and you get long exposure street photography. It's a really interesting subject, quite difficult to get right because there's a certain degree of luck. You have to take hazard into account. There's, when shooting long exposures handheld, which we're going to do, and the results are bound to surprise you most of the times, because you might see something or someone and try to go for that scene, but by the time you end your exposure, it will have evolved into something else. Now, although we're talking about long exposures, for the intent of and purpose of this particular subject, we're not going to be doing very long exposures. They're actually going to be on the shorter side of a long exposure. Now, when you say long exposure, most people think 30 seconds, 15 seconds, 20 seconds, really, really long exposures. What we're doing today is fifth of a second, fourth of a second, maybe give and take a fraction of a second, because any longer than that, you won't have any recognizable features of a human being. Any shorter than that, it will freeze the subject and it will no longer be a long exposure. That long-ass intro out of the way, let me take another sip of this absolutely glorious beer. Hop Hooligans, write me a check, goddammit. You better pay me, because I've been paying you a lot. This is not cheap. If in my previous video we had Neumarkt, which was 50 euro cents a bottle, this is on the opposite side of the spectrum. This is about 4 euros a bottle, more than that. That's really expensive in Romanian terms. But hey, it's a really good beer. It's worth it. Ah, splendid. Absolutely splendid. Before getting into the meat and potatoes of this video, I will ask you to kindly consider supporting my work here. If you find this interesting, enjoyable, or valuable in any way, please consider smashing that like button. It's the most helpful thing you can do. Just press the like button, watch this video, and tell the YouTube algorithm it's a video worth recommending to other people. Stay for that. Subscribe, because about more than 90% of my viewers have not subscribed. And click the bell while you're at it, because that way you'll be notified whenever I upload new content. There's also buy me a coffee link down below if you're so inclined. You want to make a donation? Who am I to judge? I'll gladly accept it. Yes, thank you. And now let's talk specifics. Most of the times when people think long exposures, they automatically think about nighttime photography. But this is not what we're doing today. We're actually doing the opposite. It's going to be daytime photography. You might think, how are we going to get away with taking really long exposures during the daytime? And that is with the help of this. This is an ND filter. I personally use an ND 1000, also called ND10, because it cuts down 10 entire stops of light. So with the help of that, we're able to take really long exposures. And sometimes, depending on the actual light situation, we're going to have to compensate with a lot of ISO, so don't be surprised. Well, that entirely depends on the strength of the ND filter you're going to be using, but in my particular situation, whenever I use the ND 1000 rather, I have been known to push my ISO all the way up to 8000, because a bit of cloud cast, a bit of shade, and yeah, you're gonna have to compensate for light, because there's simply not going to be plenty of available light. I do recommend lighter filters, something like ND4s, ND6, which only cut 4 stops, 6 stops of light respectively, but I'm going to have to make do with what I have, and I only have this ND 1000. I personally also use a couple of these step-up rings, because the filter itself is 67 millimeter diameter, and my lens is a 55mm diameter. So I'm going to have to compensate for that. Speaking of lenses, I recommend going for wider focal lengths. I will be using 40mm for this particular outing. I have pictures from a previous attempt where I was using the 28mm, but today I'm using the 40mm, the wonderful Konica Hexanon AR 40mm f1.8, reviewed here on the channel. I think it's this corner. Did I get it right? Probably not. Hopefully yes. So focal length. I do recommend wider focal length rather than shorter and tighter because it's easier to compose. The way you're going to be approaching this is almost counterintuitive in a way. You're not going to be aiming for subjects. The best way I found was to find a good background and wait for a subject to pass through. Now, the reason for that is mainly because the background is going to be sharp and fixed, while the subject is going to be simply a trail of shadow, just a ghostly figure, a silhouette perhaps. So, mosquitoes, damn you. So, it always pays to have a really pleasant background and punctuate it with a dynamic movement of a ghostly figure. Jesus, I'm a poet today. Must be this beer. It feeds the poet in me. So yeah, do keep in mind that your sensor size actually affects the effective field of view you're getting. Now, a 40mm will always be a 40mm, be it used on micro four thirds or full frame. However, the resulting field of view will not be the same. So keep that in mind when choosing focal lengths. If you have a micro four thirds or an APS-C size sensor, go the widest you can because you're gonna have to take into account the crop factor. Now the thing with wider focal lengths and larger sensors is that together they give a wider field of view, and thus it makes it easier to compose. If all that you have is a really tight portion of the environment, it's going to be really tough to allow for movement in that cramped space. So I've touched upon using ND filters, wide focal lengths, shutter times. I did touch upon this slightly earlier, and I recommend going for a fifth of a second, fourth of a second. Now, yet again, this is where sensor size comes in again and messes up your calculations, because the relative speed of the subject to your camera is also dependent on sensor size combined with focal length. Now, if all this sounds very complicated, keep in mind that the longer the focal length, the smaller the sensor, the faster your subject will appear to be moving. Still, do try to go for fifth of a second, fourth of a second, sixth of the second, and thereabouts. I found it's the ideal shutter speed where you still get a recognizable human figure, although very ghostly at that, but still it is a long exposure. F-stop. I dare you to use wide open. Now, as far as light goes, it might seem like the right thing to do because, let's say, for my situation, I have 10 stops of light I need to compensate for. 10 stops of light missing I need to compensate for. So you may be tempted to use fast, like really wide openings, is what I meant. But focusing will be really difficult. So that said, I recommend sticking to f5.6 or maybe f8. Thereabouts might be good because focusing is going to be tough. It's going to be a crapshoot most of the times, especially if you're doing this for the first time. It's going to be difficult and you're going to mess up a lot of frames. Success rate is going to be pretty low. It's starting to rain a little. I'm going to start walking, start taking some photos, and I'll talk to you a bit later. Now this is Zimand, a wonderful IPA. Locally brewed craft beer, and it's truly, truly great. Slightly, well, more than slightly, comfortably bitter, but very fresh, strong citrus flavors. And really a joy to drink. You may notice I'm wearing different clothes, and this is because it's a different day altogether. It's actually the day after I started shooting this video. And the reason for that is because long exposure daylight street photography doesn't come easy. Good shots are not readily abundant. So, yeah, I want to amend what I said earlier and offer a few more pointers. Now, I did say I dare you to shoot wide open, but as a matter of fact, it's pretty much exactly what I ended up doing yesterday because there was simply not enough available light shooting at f8 with a 10-stop ND filter, and even with the ISO compensating and reaching crazy values of 12,000, which is still workable on my camera, is pretty high. I ended up needing to switch to wide open because there was simply not enough available light. So shooting at f1.8 is mostly what I did. Now, it's not as difficult as I made it up to be. Take that with a grain of salt. Your mileage may vary. It depends how comfortable you are with manual focusing, or rather, how good your lens is at autofocusing through an ND filter. That aside, a few more things regarding composition and choosing your scenes. It's key to choose simple scenes with either just a single subject or a couple, or scenes that make sense, because you end up, otherwise you end up having a mess of things, and when everything's a ghostly figure, it doesn't serve to make for good compositions. It's all just a mess. What else? Wide shots. I think I touched upon that. I feel like I'm forgetting something. Yeah, I remembered. Good old beer helps you remember stuff before it helps you forget everything. Well, rather unsurprisingly and very obviously so, in my opinion, long exposure photography is about movement. So choose scenes where something happens, where your subjects are moving, streets with passers-by, and this sort of fair, like what I'm visiting now, is really great for this sort of endeavor, because there's always people walking and moving and doing stuff, and try to make the most of what you've got. Now, I just got off from work, having a beer, so I'm going to try to find a few more shots, and hopefully I'll have enough to make an actual video out of this. Catch you later. Yet another wonderful IPA by Zeman, the local breweries. Yet another day, because this video is proving to be incredibly hard. Well, rather, not the video itself. Getting the right amount and right quality of pictures for it is indeed proving to be really difficult. A bit more difficult than I expected. Now, there's certainly not a lack of subjects or characters, because this fair I've been visiting for the last couple of days, this being the third or fourth, never mind, is quite populated. There's a lot of people visiting, there's really a lot of stuff going on. However, the difficult part is proving to be getting good pictures. Now, hopefully, by the time I'm done with shooting today, I will have a fair bit of good pictures. Certainly enough to make this whole video worthwhile, hopefully, rather than certainly. But I just want to offer a few closing remarks. Did I mention this is a wonderful beer? Can you see the sweat on it? Oh man, I just love sweaty beers. Just fantastic. It's really warm, but not hot. Really warm, beautiful day. And in closing, I want to touch upon the aspect of color or black and white. Now, some of you may know, and I dare say black and white is kind of my thing. I do enjoy, especially when it comes to people photography or street photography, I do enjoy shooting black and white the most, by far. Exactly why is a subject for another time, but that is not to say that long exposure street photography during daytime, that's quite a mouthful, is not possible in color. It's very much so possible. However, I personally stay away from it, and I would recommend you stick to black and white if you're trying this on your own, because with color there is a whole new layer of added complexity, and color tends to add visual information to your shots. Now, when shooting long exposures, it's really easy to get messy shots, unintelligible, messy shots. So taking color out of the equation, I think, as far as I understand and approach photography, I think it simplifies things in the way that all you have to deal with, all you have to be concerned with is the ratio of light and darkness and shapes and forms. Everything else, and color is a fair bit of added visual information. So take that out of consideration, and all you're left with is shape, form, and light. It makes for a much easier time with composing your shots. That said, things are still rather difficult because it's kind of like a gamble almost. It's a bit of a lottery. You might go for a scene, you might expect something to happen, and by the time your fifth of a second or half-second exposure finishes, your subject walked in the wrong direction. There was somebody that stood between you and your subject. The scene changed in such a way to make for a crappy image. So it might not seem like a lot, but compare that with 125th of a second or 500th of a second, which let's say is a usual exposure during the day. Fourth of a second or half a second is a long time for something to go wrong and mess up your picture. So yeah, just make your job easier when you can and hope for good pictures. Now, that said, I think I'm gonna leave it at that and finish this beer here. This has been Radu. Thank you very much for being here. If you're enjoying the content on this channel and you want to see more, I would appreciate your support in the way of destroying the like button and watching this video till the end. It's really helpful because I do need the watch time. You can also subscribe, hit the bell in order to be notified of future uploads. There's a bug hovering me. There's also buy me a coffee link down below if you're feeling generous and want to make a small donation. There's also all my socials in the description there. Until next time, see you, be well, and please do enjoy what's left of the summer. If you're a northern hemisphere type of dude, that has been all. Bye-bye.